standing firm together against oppression, holding hands. It doesn't matter where you're from, or if you're young or woman or man. We're here for the same reason. We want to take back our land. Oh God, thank you.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good evening and welcome to the special focus. I am Zahid Jadwid and we are together until 8 p.m. tonight right here on Salah Media. We are coming to you live via our live stream on salahmedia.com/listen-live on our Facebook page and on our YouTube channel, as well as live on our Twitter page. Thank you so much for tuning in. Now, you may have heard of a few kidnapping incidents which have made it to the news headlines over the last month or so. The reality is that kidnapping occurs more frequently than it appears in the headlines, and it's a common crime which seems to be on the rise. According to a report released by news outlet City Press earlier this year, kidnapping gangs are making a fortune in South Africa, with gangs earning more than 1 billion rand in the last year alone. Oftentimes, wealthy South Africans and foreign nationals, particularly those of Asian origin as well as those from neighboring countries, are targeted. However, in recent months, ordinary South Africans, including children, have also been targeted. Reported police statistics show that about 16 people are kidnapped or abducted in South Africa daily, though the reality might be worse, as many families of victims are threatened not to involve police and pay ransom instead. So tonight on the special focus, we are trying to get to the bottom of the scourge in order to find out what it is that we are dealing with, how severe is the threat, and how you and I can stay safe from the rising crime of kidnapping. Remember that you can participate in this discussion. WhatsApp comments and questions to the number 061 7660355. Tweet and tag at Salah Media. Alternatively, you may drop a comment below on our Facebook and YouTube live videos. And please don't forget to use the hashtag the special focus. Let me welcome our guests. Firstly, we have Mr. Mike Bolhuis, who is a specialized crime investigator at SA Safety and Security. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Mr. Bolhuis, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me? It said paused.
Okay, it seems we're having some trouble connecting with Mr. Mike Bolhuis. We'll try to get that better connection and then we will reintroduce him to the show. In the meantime, let me introduce Mr. Bolhuis. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Indeed, it's a pleasure having you on the show this evening. Let me also introduce Advocate Bosman, who is a kidnapping extortion manager at KSU International. Thank you so much for joining us as well.
Good evening, guests and also viewers. Thank you for having me on your talk show. Thank you.
Mr. Bosman?
Could you hear me? Hello?
Can you hear us clearly?
Yes, I can hear you clearly. Can you hear me?
Okay, I can hear you now. We also have Mr. Martin Ewi, who is a senior researcher at the Institute for Security Studies. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you. Good evening. It's a pleasure to be on your show.
And last but not least, let me introduce Professor Gerard Labuschagne, who is the criminologist at the Criminological Society in Africa. Thank you for joining us, to you as well. Okay, so let's begin with you, Mr. Bolhuis. In fact, before we begin, let me just inform you that we had invited the South African Police Service to participate and share their input on this panel discussion. However, they had declined to participate. So my first things first, what is kidnapping and human trafficking? So could you take us through the different sorts of kidnapping? I mean, there is the usual crime where a child is kidnapped and held for ransom, but then there is also such a thing as adult kidnapping, and the business community has increasingly been affected over the last few years.
I've heard a bit of your question, but I assume you want a bit of a rundown pertaining the situation regarding kidnapping in South Africa. So there are several levels. The public need to understand that many parents withhold their children, and then they could also, cases could be brought against them for kidnapping. So that is, then you've got what I call the middle field of kidnappings, where people are being held or being kept from each other because they want money or certain things sorted. They literally are being kept under a threat or intimidation that if certain things isn't paid or done, they will not be released from their grasp, but they're not necessarily physically removed from a specific spot to another spot, but they are, as to speak, they are being controlled, completely controlled, manipulated, and extorted. But the kidnapping that we have seen that is on everybody's minds is the two other levels where children are being taken and then trafficked, or ransoms being demanded, or very rich businessmen. This is the high level where a rich businessman is taken and then they want multi-millions of rands. That is the high and top level kidnapping, and there is proper planning in. Before they do that, they will do a thorough investigation, a syndicate. Usually there are people from other countries involved, as far as Dubai and even China, and they will make use of West and East Africans, and they will have a complete oiled machine group. Each one will do its part, and they will do a proper forensic investigation into this person's life and see how much this family can afford. And then they will take him when he's on his way to church, or usually old men or very rich businessmen, after they've done, as I've said, an extensive observance, surveillance, and investigation into his financial affairs. Once he is taken, they know everything. They know the local police, what is the authorities' ability, if there's any, they know exactly what, where, when, and how, and then they will demand multi-millions of rands and only return such a person once it's paid. In the middle level, you will have a lot of ignorant people or wannabe gangs or groups that would just grab people with the idea as to take their cell phone numbers, call the families and say, listen, we've got your child, because crime begets crime. The word is out now, kidnapping pays. And since everybody and so much bogus news has been spread as well about kidnappings, it's now the in thing and the new crime. So everybody that just hears kidnapping, hears money, take the cell phone, phone the parents and say to the parents, we want a couple of bucks. That's the mid-level. Otherwise, we're going to hurt your son, or they slap him through the face a bit, etc., etc. That is a mid-level kidnapping. Those are the levels of kidnapping, some of them that I can explain.
Thank you so much for that explanation. I think it's really important that people do understand what it is that we are dealing with, especially as you mentioned, while kidnapping seems to be on the rise. Now, Professor Labuschagne, thank you so much for joining us, and welcome to the show. So help us understand, how rife is this crime of kidnapping in South Africa? Doing research, one would find that it is undoubtedly a common crime in this country, but there seems to be a sort of dispute over the finer details, like how many people are kidnapped and how often.
Yeah, thanks, Saeed. Yeah, I think one of the big differences, I think, and Mike Bolles alluded to it, is the definition of kidnapping. People always think when you hear kidnapping, it's you're grabbing someone, taking them away, trying to get money out of the family. And that's actually not 100% correct. You know, kidnapping in South Africa is really depriving someone of their freedom of movement. So like as Mike said, you can lock someone in their bedroom, in their very own bedroom, and refuse to let them out. That's technically kidnapping. So you'll find the police crime stats don't actually give us an accurate reflection, because it includes all those cases that are not what we traditionally think of when you say to the layperson kidnapping. For example, we have serial rapists who lure a victim away with them under false pretenses, for example, offering them a job. That would also be regarded as a charge of kidnapping in addition to the rape. So that's the one thing, that the definition of what kidnapping is in South African law is far broader than what we think as lay people. And of course, secondly, as also alluded to, is that a lot of people don't go to the police to report when they do have these traditional kidnapping with ransoms involved or extortion involved. So our crime stats are really not helpful in that sense. They don't give us an accurate picture, and for those two particular main reasons.
Yeah, and of course, people not reporting these crimes and preferring to work directly with the kidnappers and just pay the ransom and get it done with. I think that also affects the way that police can report on these statistics. So, if I could just move on now to Mr. Advocate Herman Bosman. Is the issue of kidnapping receiving as much attention as it should from the public and similarly from security officials as the police?
Well, I think it's largely underestimated the amount of kidnappings happening. First of all, I want to say I'm not very pro having a lot of discussion about the actual kidnapping incidents in the media, because we also must be very careful not to educate kidnappers in the whole process and having them informed on what they're doing and not doing. But on the other hand, it's very important that parents and children be aware of the threat out there, that we do inform them about it, and that we do implement the correct strategies to address this. Preventatively, I would say at this point in time is extremely important, and to look at situational awareness and bringing that across to our children and family becomes more and more important. Many years ago and up until now, we've looked at how can we secure our homes? How can we prevent the theft of a motor vehicle? We take out insurance for a lot of things in life, but we don't look at how can we make sure we are safe? How can we make sure our children are safe? How do we educate our children not to be taken? So it's a bit also looking more and more at risk management and assessment of what has changed in our society, what has changed in South Africa. There's a big change since 2010 till now. I mean, pre-2000, kidnapping in South Africa were largely unheard of. But after 2000, it started to happen more and more regularly. Since 2010, regular kidnapping incidents were managed by us on a continuous basis. After the lockdown has been eased, I've never seen so many and heard of so many kidnappings and children taken and people ever before. And I've been personally involved in several the last couple of weeks where I assist communities and people with incidents. So definitely so. I agree with you. It should get much more attention, but it should be done strategically in a correct manner. And we should definitely, if I may just say, differentiate between a typical domestic kidnapping where a family is involved and the parties are known, and those that's criminally orientated, where either the person himself or herself is the target or financial or other gain is the target. And also there to differentiate between that. And that is very important that we correctly characterize the different types and to address that.
Yeah, interestingly, you mentioned about your skepticism to actually speak about this issue with the media. Just being careful enough not to inform kidnappers, give them too much information. So, how do you think we should go about trying to strike this balance between creating awareness whilst at the same time not giving too much information to increase the risk?
Well, I think first of all, when we look at specific cases that's been covered in the media, and I look at what's written about those cases, even when managing it, the kidnappers will tell you that they saw or heard or see that in the media. So they can continuously see what's happening because it's broadcast, it's being covered in the media. On the other hand, you inform people that your children must always be in sight, to inform them on the normal strategies and things to do and not to do, and be careful of where they go and so forth. It's not a problem in general. But when we discuss the topic of kidnapping and report on it, and specifically ongoing kidnappings, whilst it's happening, it's very, very irresponsible to do that. I've been negotiating kidnappings and assisting management of kidnappings where you're busy in an operation and then you read in the media what's happening behind the scenes. And that can be devastating to the hostage and the poor family, which is also a victim at home, and friends suffering because of this. Because obviously, Gerard, I see you nodding there, but I think we're underestimating the impact of that.
Mm, yeah. So as you mentioned, since 2010, there seems to be an increase in the number of kidnappings that are taking place. Martin, what exactly do you think is driving the scourge of kidnappings? Is there some sort of external influence from territories beyond the borders of South Africa, maybe international syndicates that are operating within South Africa? Look, I want to go through this particular part of this discussion as carefully as possible, as I'm sure you'd understand the stigma, especially against African nationals of Nigerian origin. So I say this without making any allegations and without perpetuating this notion, but as a question that would apply to criminal syndicates across the globe from various countries of origin. What exactly do you think is driving the scourge of kidnappings, Martin?
Thank you very much. Indeed, yeah. Since 2010, we have seen a rise in kidnapping, but a different type of kidnapping because the decade before that, we actually had a more serious kidnapping trend. But the kidnapping we saw then was kidnapping of children, underage people, which were mostly used for trafficking, for international trafficking, which means that the trend was actually driven from outside, a global trend. You mentioned Nigeria. Nigeria has been, for me, the hub of kidnapping in Africa, the kind of kidnapping that we're seeing on the continent. Although the international community has been more concerned about kidnapping by terrorist groups, which for me, it's not up to the level of I would say, financial kidnapping, kidnapping for ransom that we have seen exploded in Southern Africa and Nigeria, especially. In South Africa, if you look at the what were really driving this trend, as I said, that before 2010, it was really a global trend for kidnapping, where children were being kidnapped and sold for trafficking. But we've also seen that the trends have shifted. Now, up to 2014, you remember when the government implemented these very draconian immigration laws, many of which, were to restrict the trafficking of children or the movement of children from one place to another, where we were required to show some sort of documentation in terms of, showing parenthood of children that we are traveling with. Now, these laws, I think, played a very big role in terms of reducing the trend in kidnapping that we saw, where in most cases, the kidnapping was done by, foreign syndicates, which were behind it. But what we saw after 2014 have been kidnapping instigated by family members or friends. So people were not really kidnapping people that they didn't know. So it was actually kidnappers were people that knew their victims, and their victims knew them. And we saw a shift again from there to kidnapping of rich business South Africans. This is actually the prevailing one in the past 2 years or so that we have seen, not just in South Africa, but actually in Southern Africa. Mozambique actually, coming high on the list of where, rich business people have been kidnapped for their money. So you kidnap them and you ask for a huge ransom of millions of rand. That's now, I think, not that it is slowing, but we are seeing a rise in the kind of ordinary kidnapping that I think my co-panelists have already explained. But the trend is being driven, one, by poverty. It's also being driven by criminality, the impunity that exists, where many of these kidnappers are not brought to justice, and therefore they continue to do the kidnappings that we see in South Africa.
Yeah, and just before we move on, actually, an interesting point you make about poverty also being one of the reasons why kidnappings have been increasing. But Mike, I just want to come to you quickly before we move on. What are your thoughts? Do you think there are external forces at play here in many of the cases of kidnappings here in South Africa?
Oh, yes, definitely. What the previous gentleman just said was a proper expose. There was many children taken from our country by family members, which just didn't want to sit through the divorce, and they took the children and they left the country. Fortunately, the government stepped in and made the exits much more difficult for them. but the external forces is definitely involved. And he mentioned something there that I wanted to mention as well. The biggest drive of crime in the world, of most crime, is illiteracy, uneducated people who are poor people. If people are very poor and uneducated and illiterate, they will literally do anything what they can in order to feed themselves and their families, and they will do the most heinous crimes. That's why we get people that will kill other people for 5,000 rand, and we get people that will assist in kidnappings just to get some money. But the external forces being involved, seeing South Africa as a lucrative country, people that will pay, as mentioned, the scenarios in Mozambique and in other countries. It happens quite often that we hear of people in other countries also being held and kidnapped and held for ransom, because South Africa is still seen as a country in Africa that has reasonable resources to pay. And I've made a note here, all of us here will do absolutely everything if our child is taken. I will not try and save any money. I'll do whatever it takes to get my child or children back. So unfortunately, kidnapping is going to keep rising, as Herman has said, because it is so widely known that it's a lucrative crime. It's a crime that can be committed, and crime begets crime. Once the most of the public, most people in the world is in a situation where poverty and ignorance plays a very big role, they will look at any form of crime they can commit, not just stealing a cell phone, but getting in big and good money like muling and kidnapping of people and so forth. So I am definitely convinced that kidnapping is a worldwide problem and a worldwide concern, and there is definitely from the other countries involved in our country committing kidnapping and abductions.
And of course, I suppose international syndicates are more difficult to work against, to bring them to justice than local ones, of course. Mike?
Yeah, our country is unfortunately incredibly corrupt, and I'm sorry if this upsets people, but about 80% of our police is corrupt. And when I mean corrupt, I mean not necessarily selling a docket. I mean when you're in a position where you cannot protect and serve. I mean, if you're in the police and you cannot protect and serve, you are corrupt. You cannot work and operate in the police if you are there to protect and serve. You're not able to do so. So corruption is, in my eyes, not only when a docket is being sold or you're not doing your work, it's when you aren't there to be the protector of the country. And then our government, it speaks for itself. The ANC government has absolutely left us to fight for ourselves. We have no support from the government. And even any and all of the authorities do complain about this. This is a national problem that has caused crime to escalate, because once again, if you can commit the crime and can get away with it, you will do it. And crime begets crime. So it is a very gentlemen like these here and institutions like ours being the light in the dark, trying to make a difference, trying to assist the public, working with the police. Make no mistake, I work with the 20% there is. I try and assist, train, and help. Some of my best friends are in the police, but we have a very, very big problem. We don't have an infrastructure. We don't have a proper authority system. And then when we do get one, for some or other reason, suddenly corruption seeps in and money becomes the agenda and people become corrupt or get bought. And then the cases doesn't get handled at all. And that is my biggest concern in this country, with the rise of all the crimes. Can our country withstand it and stand against it?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting way to look at it. I think that opens really a huge area of discussion, noting that, as you say, about 80% of members of the police service in South Africa are corrupt. And Professor Gerard Labuschagne, I think you have served within the police service, the South African police service. So what are your thoughts on this? How do you think corruption within the police force, within ranks of the police force, how do you think it undermines our efforts to combat kidnappings?
Yeah, I think firstly, I mean, there are complicated crimes in general, whether it's a small level, low level kidnapping to a high level, high value target kidnapping. They have to be, they're similar in many ways, but you do usually require more skills than perhaps the average station detective has. If you're dealing with the syndicates that are targeting the very, very, very high value targets, like we've seen in the Muslim community over the past few years, where they're talking, 40 million ransoms and upwards, those are massive international syndicates. They are using technology that's probably superseding the police's capabilities. And there, of course, it's far more difficult, which is why we haven't really seen arrests, and not really high-level arrests in those types of cases. And we normally tell people that you must not expect an arrest with a tactical release of your family member as the outcome. It's going to be a negotiated outcome. So SAPS, in a sense, I think they are playing catch-up to the flexibility that these international syndicates have and the financial resources that they have to do these things very effectively and properly and using technology to their advantage. At the same time, I do want to say that, the SAPS negotiators, that myself and Herman were both SAPS negotiators, there are a number of them, or a small core of them, that have been involved in quite a number of these cases. And if they are being used from the negotiation point of view to assist in these cases, then I think, they can do quite well with the negotiation side of it. But I'm not sure if SAPS does have a consolidated strategy specifically for your high value targets on how to deal with those types of kidnapping cases from a are we liaising with our colleagues overseas who are dealing with these syndicates and learning from them so we can develop a proper integrated strategy? Or are we ad hoc using people, when these cases happen who might have worked on one before? So maybe they're doing that and I'm not aware of it. I really do hope so. So again, I think negotiators, well-trained, some have worked on a lot of these cases, but I'm not sure if there's a consolidated approach by the negotiators to deal with these and respond to these. And again, as I said, on the investigation side, unfortunately, these guys are so advanced that it's difficult to catch them. And I don't think we do necessarily have the investigative skills and capacity to actually catch them.
Yeah, I do want to delve into that topic of discussion regarding why so few kidnappers are actually caught. And that's something also which Martin had picked up on earlier on. But we do have to take a quick ad break at 28 minutes past 7 p.m. Central African time. And when we get back, we will dig deeper into this discussion and we will take some of your comments from the listeners. Remember, the WhatsApp number to send those messages and questions is 061766 0355. I see Nafisa Sadr is also listening to this show. In fact, she's watching on Facebook. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's take an ad break, and when we get back, we will dig deeper. Please do stay tuned.
It's a new beginning. It's a new era. Salam Media, humanitarian journalism.
Osman's Taj Mahal Spice and Rice. For over 80 years, Osman's Taj Mahal have been perfecting the art of the perfect blend of spices, pure, aromatic, and well-seasoned. Spices to tantalize your taste buds. From creative cuisines to gastronomical gourmet goodies. From exotic odors to traditional dishes, Osman's Taj Mahal have remained synonymous with quality spices and condiments. Taj Mahal rice, beans, and lentils. Try our range of chili bite mixes, rose and ilachi syrup, our quick and easy biryani pack, and our traditional range of spice blends. Osman's Taj Mahal. There is no substitute for quality.
It's time to act now. COVID-19 is a global pandemic and we need your help to flatten the curve. Islamic Relief is reaching out to the most vulnerable of our community in South Africa, Yemen and Gaza. 400 Rand can provide a family with a food pack in South Africa and 500 Rand a hygiene pack in Syria, Yemen and Gaza. With your help, we can save lives across the world. Donate now. Go to www.islamic-relief.org.za.
With over 80 years of experience, IG Hussein and Company are renowned for their quality Islamic wear and goods. IG Hussein and Company stock a variety of Islamic items, musallas, kitabs, Medina dates, perfumes and exclusive gifts. We guarantee you a unique and friendly shopping experience for the entire family. Visit our new branch in Overport at 202 Kenilworth Park, Brickfield Road. Open 7 days a week with ample parking and wheelchair friendly. Like us on Facebook or Instagram at IG Hussein for our latest promotions and updates. IG Hussein and Company, your Islamic lifestyle. Connect and stay ahead with Salam Media. This is Salam Media, coming to you live from South Africa.
31 minutes past 7 p.m. Central African Time. You are tuned into Salam Media. This is the special focus with myself, Zahid Jadwid. We are discussing kidnappings and the rise of kidnappings here in South Africa. Before the ad break, rather, Professor Labuschagne, one of my panelists on this discussion, was speaking about the challenge of the lack of resources. And then also Mike Bolles touched quite a bit on corruption within the South African Police Service. But in your opinion, Mr. Martin Ewe, who is a senior researcher at the Institute for Security Studies, why do you think that kidnappers are in many cases not brought to book for their actions?
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think it is because of the nature of kidnapping itself, the way it is carried out. As I said before, you have kidnapping carried out by terrorist groups, where it is part of an agenda to perpetuate terror against a certain part of the population or even against the state. That also becomes difficult because the state is unable to prevent kidnapping, especially in the case where kidnapping is carried out by a family member. No one will immediately suspect, a husband, a wife, or a cousin, or even an uncle, to be a kidnapper. These are people who pretend to love their family, especially the young ones. How will you come to suspect them, to be kidnappers? And this is the key problem. And if you also look at where kidnapping happens, it is where you least expect them. So sometimes when you are completely not aware that something like that could happen to you, that's when you fall victim to kidnapping. The second aspect is investigation. The state has not been able to carry out a very competent investigation because investigation for kidnapping is extremely expensive because of sometimes you don't even have any lead in terms of who to suspect and where to start. So it makes it very difficult to bring kidnappers, especially successful ones, to justice because of the cost of investigation to the state. So many people cannot also afford. And the third aspect is that I think it was mentioned by Mike that kidnappers can tell you if you report to the state or to the police or you get anybody involved, you will lose your loved ones. So because of that, victims of kidnapping tend not to involve the police in the situation because they fear the life of their loved ones. They actually fear their lives in the case where you are the victim because if you involve the police, they will kill you. So these are some of the key things that actually prevent kidnapping from prosecution and from effective criminal justice response.
Yeah, that is really a sticky situation. I mean, as I mentioned earlier on, many people choose rather not to report this and involve the police due to the nature of the situation that we are experiencing. But if I could just move on to you, Professor Labuschagne, what is the success rate of reuniting victims with their families? We've spoken about actually why the South African police services are unable to prosecute these, in most cases, to be able to bring these perpetrators to justice. But what really is the success rate of reuniting families? Once a person is kidnapped, how likely is it that they will be returned to their families?
Yeah. So Zahid, if I look at the high-value kidnappings where they're asking for large amounts, almost all of those people do come back in the South African context. I mean, they'll be gone for 4 months, 5 months, 9 months or longer. But if the family does pay, they will be returned, and they are usually not overwhelmingly physically injured in the whole kidnapping process. So yes, actually, I mean, a lot of these individuals, there is a negotiated return, and they are returned, as I said, in relatively good, safe condition, if the main purpose is solely to get money out of the family.
Advocate Herman Bosman, he is a kidnapping and extortion manager at TSU International, and I do understand that he's previously worked with the South African Police Services as a negotiator. Advocate, could you just tell us about some of these experiences working as a negotiator? It could get quite sticky and dangerous at times.
Yes, it can. I think the major concern is always the safety of the hostage and to make sure that the hostage is returned safely to the loved ones. And hence I want to highlight that kidnapping is a very complicated and a complex crime. And when managing any of the incidents, I think you need people properly trained, focusing on managing them. In the years that we have managed it and focused on it, that is what we did. We focus extensively on training, extensively on research. The job of the kidnappers are well researched. That is their way of earning a living. That is the way of making money. And they plan properly. It is very, very difficult for a person, a detective, or anybody that's getting a kidnapping case docket in his hand for the first time to understand the dynamics and how to investigate that process. So it is, in my opinion, very, very important to establish a permanent group of people that focus on it, study this. In all the years that I've been managing this, if it wasn't for the fact that I've devoted myself making sure that I understand the dynamics, understand why it is happening, understanding what is it I want to achieve, and having a proper strategy addressing it, you're going to battle if you try and investigate it on an ad hoc basis as any other normal crime that has lapsed. Kidnapping is happening while you investigate it. It is not a completed crime like a theft or many of the other crimes that we know. It is something that is in process while you're investigating and while there's negotiations. Therefore, the negotiation process that we have followed, together with the investigative and information strategies that we follow, need to be integrated. And I think that is the challenge that we had and that Gerard also touched on, is that we need to make sure that everybody, private, the government, take hands in this and have an integrated process and strategy addressing this. We cannot do it alone. We cannot single-handedly try and solve this because of the method and the way that they have strategized and managed it, which I don't want to allude and go into in detail now. But they're making it very difficult for law enforcement. And we need to be one up on that by sitting together and having a proper and better plan and strategy.
And of course, before we do end this discussion, I do want to touch a bit on misinformation and disinformation. Of course, Mike Bolles will be able to contribute quite a bit on that topic. But just before we get there, Advocate Bosman, I want to also speak about how the likelihood of kidnappers coming and pouncing on the same victim once again. Because, of course, once you are kidnapped, it's not as though the kidnappers forget about you. They still do have your information. They know where you live. What's the likelihood of them coming back for the same victim once again?
Well, it's not ruled out. I mean, it can happen. But it is not as if it has happened a lot of times where I've had cases before where you just have it regularly over and over with the same person. Obviously, once it's happened, a lot of things are put in place. A lot of measures are put in place. And they also, in a lot of cases, realize the extent to which this has gone and rather move on to somebody else to target. But I haven't had cases where a victim has become multiple. Yes, it may happen in a domestic type of kidnapping or relationship where there's court orders that's been contravened and re-contravened and so forth, but not in the classical kidnapping or in the sense of a criminal type of kidnapping or also an ideology type of kidnapping. No.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Mike, you have been running a campaign against misinformation, disinformation. Of course, it is quite disastrous when misinformation gets out there in the public domain, disinformation as well. How bad is this when it comes to handling kidnapping, when it comes to public awareness about the situation that is at hand?
Yes, Herman and Gerard both touched on this. The fake news is probably my third and fourth biggest problem in South Africa. We have a very, very big problem pertaining working together. What Herman just said there was that is music to my ears, but I don't see it happening. We have a saying, we say, twee boere het 4 opinies en 5 kerke. They will most probably laugh now, but that is our biggest problem. It's everybody on his own, elke ou op sy eie molshoop, and everybody pulling and tugging in different directions, not wanting to work together, jealous of each other, don't see the good in each other. And not only that, even after tonight, there will be people that will be saying stuff about me, you, Gerard, and the other gentlemen as well on Facebook. And they will choose and they will play people out against each other instead of looking at the common, most the important idea of all standing against crime, seeing crime as a group together, as people standing together, addressing crime and looking past religion, past color, past political affiliations, past whether you're in the police or private, or security or a housewife, a farmer, whatever. The problem is to get everybody together, to work together against a common goal, and that is to address crime, from the cell phone that's being stolen to the murder. Concerning fake news, let me shock you. We have in the last, since COVID, and even before, since the kidnapping, once the kidnapping story runs on WhatsApp, you cannot believe how quickly we have another saying, the story starts on this side of the circle. Once it's around on the other side, it's the devil's algebra. There's been so much things added that you just cannot believe, and it becomes fake news, and everybody is just so just wants to send it, and in the meantime they don't do proper vetting, don't do proper evaluation, they do no investigation, they don't ask the authorities or professionals, so much so that General Mawela the other day, even once again, and I have urged him to send out many a times daily letters warning about cybercrime, kidnapping, etc., etc. But I'll tell you of one crime quickly. A woman informed her very rich brother, saying that she was kidnapped, yelling, screaming the whole story, and then the WhatsApps and everything followed. They want R1 million, and they played the whole scenario out. This came out on a WhatsApp group. It came to us. Once we've investigated it, we, by proper cyber tracking, found the woman where she was in cahoots with the very West African men and a boyfriend, completely hooked and in drugs, completely planning this extortion. And we got them there within half an hour. It was admitted. And this is after the police was involved and asked to get involved, wasting of police time. There is a spate of people making or using big crimes happening in South Africa and planning it themselves in order to extort money. Extortion is probably the biggest crime in South Africa presently, extortion, sextortion, etc., etc. But just to round up, it is very, very important what the previous gentleman has said. Unless the South Africans in its totality has a common goal that we all stand together against crime, irrespective of who you are, what you believe, what color you are, where you are, and what your position or your rank is. And if we can work with information correctly and regress a bit and get off the phones and the spreading of news, and only spreading news if it's absolutely necessary and if it's vetted and not fake, in order to assist or to warn the public, and then work together, we will have a very big difference, and the crime will drop.
Yeah, I think in this age, it's especially important that people be cautious before forwarding messages that they receive, because anything that's spread, as you mentioned, on platforms such as WhatsApp, it can really spread like wildfire once it's out there. And in fact, I'm just looking at an article right here on News 24 where police have again urged people to stop sharing fake news about kidnappings and human trafficking. And in fact, in the latest incident, a fabricated video about a kidnapping in Klerksdorp was widely shared on social media. Bogus voice notes as well about human trafficking were also being shared without checking its authenticity. So this does affect also police resources as well, Mike.
Yeah, very much, because now the police has that responsibility to deal with the fake news as well. I have previously spoken of the percentage of corruption, but I must tell you, the police in itself, many a times find themselves totally abused, totally unassisted, and the support of that corruption can completely change that percentage if the public in South Africa works with the police and not unnecessarily make it difficult for them. I many a times in my talks ask the people, when last have you had a proper discussion with your local police? When last have you and your local police had a coffee together? I mean, people don't mingle, they don't talk, they don't communicate, they don't share ideas and come together and do proper crime prevention. They don't do that. It's each one on his own. Each one believes his own thing, and each one chooses a different church or color. And that is going to cause our demise. And I address those that knows the most and does the least, because those who are literate and not poor has no excuse. They know of better, and they should address this immediately. But fake news is a very, very big problem. It's sending the police in all kinds of directions, and that puts the police in a spot where it's cry wolf. They won't take this serious anymore.
And that also leads me to another question. Are the police really equipped and able to combat this other issue where people are reporting fake crimes that don't actually exist? Martin?
I think I do agree with the issue of fake news. Fake news to the police is like a false alarm that we hear all the time. This is really what the police get all the time. So people don't report kidnapping, but when they do report, it's actually fake news. And most often, these are family members who are trying to get at each other. You look around, your child is not there, you immediately scream that your child has been kidnapped. Of which you know very well that the child is with the father. And this happens a lot in separated families or divorced families or families with problems where one want to get at each other. So, and this is frustrating for the police because when do you tell when it is the re-alarm? And the police cannot decide on this because most often it's like when you call ADT now, the first thing they think is it must be a fake alarm until it becomes clear that it is not. So the police cannot respond to all of these fake incidents, this false alarm that many families come up with. But also, even if the police were to respond to them, the police do not have the capacity. That's for sure. Kidnapping in South Africa, I think the last estimate was that about 4,000 or 5,000 cases occur each year. And that's about, that a child is kidnapped every 30 seconds or 40 seconds in South Africa, which, I mean, it was an exaggerated figure. But it's just to tell you that this is really a crime that is growing every single day in South Africa. And because of the complexity around kidnappings, particularly not knowing whether it is criminal or it is social issues when it is related to the family, the police is not able to know because we can't treat every kidnapping as if it is a crime. Most often it's a social problem where the families are trying to get at each other. But how can the police respond to such a situation? Do we need social workers to respond to kidnappings? Certainly no. And this is the dilemma that we face in this domain, which makes it only gives advantage to the crime itself to continue.
I think that's really something interesting to watch, how the police are now going to adapt to this and respond to this scourge of fake news as well. I think it's really unfair of people to be sharing information without actually verifying it. We just have about 11 minutes remaining until the end of the show. Professor Gerard Labuschagne, maybe a few tips on how to prevent kidnapping, how to be safe?
Yeah. I think I think Mike and other people did also touch on some of those, but I think the irony of it is it's not really anything different for your day-to-day kidnappings. It's about being aware of your environment, don't go anywhere with strangers. So the basic safety tips, if you apply those, should probably serve you very well to avoid being a victim of quite a lot of crimes, including kidnapping. But if you, for example, on the other side of it are your very successful businessman who owns a family-owned business, or even a CEO of a business, or you're traveling, you're part of your business is to travel to other parts of Africa, you really should be taken necessary precautions. Even if you don't have a direct threat of kidnapping, by virtue of your position, you might be a potential target, which means, unfortunately, if you are the CEO of a company, you should probably have permanent close protection. If you have a very successful cash and carry in a township and you're making millions a month, you probably should have a permanent level of protection around close protection. If we look at the cases of the high value targets where they're kidnapped, typically they didn't have close protection, or they had it and they withdrew it because they thought this was, that the threat is gone, and literally get hit the next day. Or they have it, but their bodyguards drop them off at their office, and then after the bodyguards are dropped off, they get kidnapped. So definitely those high-level people who have lots of money or have powerful positions should have some form of close protection. For your sort of street kidnappings, that's more the low-level ones, like I said, it's the basic security tips that we should probably be teaching all of our children. Be aware of your surrounding. Don't go anywhere with strangers. How to respond if a stranger approaches you, etc., is probably good for those helping prevent those types of things. And of course, just make sure your kids aren't out and about alone. Make sure you know where they are, keeping sort of a watchful eye over them.
And I think those are a few tips, very useful tips, which you and I, as individuals, could use to reduce our risk of being kidnapped as individuals. But Advocate Bosman, I just want to know from you, is there anything really that the state can do? What is their role in the reduction of kidnappings?
Was that for Herman or for myself?
For Bosman.
It was for Advocate Herman Bosman, but I think he can't hear us at this moment. We'll try to get him back. If you could just take that over, Professor Labuschagne.
Well, obviously, the police tend to be reactive. So in other words, a crime has been committed, then they respond. But again, catching criminals who do kidnappings is crime prevention also, because very rarely would these guys, if they're successful, stop at one. Because why would you? If it's a business model that works, specifically if you're charging a lot of money for your ransom, you will do it again. So I think, again, reactive policing is unfortunately how the police tend to respond, but catching these people is preventing them from doing it again. We just don't see them being caught, which means it creates an environment where people have the ability to continue to do this, or will consider doing this because they feel the police are not capable of actually investigating these crimes. And I do think that's why we've seen, specifically over the past 4 or 5 years, these high-level syndicates coming into South Africa because they feel the time is right. Our police service is not functioning at an adequate level that they can successfully commit these crimes and get away with them.
All right, we have just about 7 minutes remaining, and I think it's about time we begin wrapping up. So just your final thoughts, Martin, and then you can take over, Mike, and finally, Professor Labuschagne, final thoughts.
Thank you, Zaid. Yeah, I think this is a very complex issue, and I do agree with what the professor has said in terms of the individual measures that we have to take. Those are the ultimate measures. It's not what the police will come and do to you, it's how you take care of your own security and how you protect your own children, how you protect your house. But the key challenge here is how do you protect yourself against your own loved ones? Because the measure that we are recommending, assuming that we are protecting ourselves against foreigners, but most often it's not foreigners. It's people we love, people who babysit our children, people who are supposed to be loved by our kids. What do you do in such a case? We also need, because children, especially if they are underage, when you have children 3 to 4 years old, or even 5 years old, what is it that they can do by themselves? So it really comes down to the criminal justice system that we put in place, meaning that the South African government need to be a little more hostile towards kidnappers. Because once you teach them a couple of lessons, I've seen them do it in Nigeria, and to some extent, it did reduce kidnapping. So if we take very hostile measures against those who kidnap, you will have to think twice. Because now it has become a game, because you know that if you kidnap, the police will come, investigate, oh, it was a family member, and then you pat each other on the back, and then that's it. No, if you play with kidnapping, if you deliberately deprive a child of liberty, or even an adult, you should be prosecuted heavily and be given, heavy penalties, because that's spending the resources of the state for useless issues. So I would say, look, we need to put in place a very hostile criminal justice system towards kidnapping. That's the only way that will make people to think twice. It will frighten family members that want to play with kidnapping or want to play with others' kids. It will also frighten foreign kidnappers that want to come here and make money out of people's back by kidnapping them and terrorizing their families. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much for that. Advocate Bosman, we lost you just as I was asking you what it would require for us as a collective effort as a country to reduce the crime of kidnappings.
Well, first of all, I think more awareness of the fact that it is a problem and acknowledging the fact that it is a problem, but then addressing why it is not resolved. And that comes back to the criminal justice has just been pointed out by Martin, addressing the whole system. It's a whole cycle from reporting, investigation, the whole process of negotiation that must integrate with the investigation, information management, intelligence, and then the prosecution side. All of that must play a role and must be integrated. If it doesn't, and one of those are left behind, if it's an investigation part, if it is the negotiation part, if any of those doesn't work, we're not going to address this properly. But I want to take just a step back and say we must focus on prevention more and more and elude the public vetting, for instance, making sure that people work for you. When going to appointments, it's somebody that you know. Where do you go to these appointments? Are you being followed? Using the internet, is it a legit process that you're following or somebody scamming you? We are too gullible sometimes and just accepting everybody is honest and truthful. And then we walk right into the lines then.
Thank you so much for that. Professor Labuschagne, your final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot's been said by everybody. Yeah, I just think we're like everybody said, we're a far way off from preventing this from happening. We can have brilliant laws, but if people don't fear getting caught, they actually mean absolutely nothing. And again, that integrated approach I do believe the police should have specialized task teams dealing with these as soon as they happen. You can't waste time with these types of cases. And, corporates, for example, who have people traveling all over Africa really need to have a plan in place before these things happen. The last thing you want to do is waste hours once this happens trying to figure out how are we going to respond. If you're a family that this happens to, you really don't want to deal with this on your own. There are numerous experts in South Africa who can advise you to whatever degree you'd like them to advise you. But just because you're a very strong, hard-headed person or a good businessman does not mean you're going to be a good negotiator and manager in a kidnapping situation. It is really worth your money and your family's money to get experts in to assist you with this.
Definitely. Thank you so much for that as well. Mike, your final thoughts on this discussion as well?
Well, first of all, I want to compliment these gentlemen, and I know of other gentlemen like them. And I think we should get together and maybe draw a proper, not information overload, but factual, straightforward solution document and present this to the public and to our government. Unless the government changes and unless the police changes where it's respected and feared, and where it can protect and serve, it's not going to change and happen. We have to try and get from the top, work down. And then I would suggest that the government get apps, the police gets apps in places where we can reach the poor and the illiterate in the rural areas, because we haven't even touched on the kids that have been stolen in the rural areas for body parts. We haven't even touched on thousands, if not millions, of people in our rural areas, very poor, very illiterate people that don't even know what a police station is about, and that are so under threat and intimidation, and so many kids either just killed or thrown down a drain or kidnapped or stolen, never returned, never to be reported, unless this information, this meeting that we had tonight will only reach the haves, not the have-nots. This meeting of tonight must be presented and must flow down to the very heart of our country, all the people, all the poor and all those that is uneducated. And then I would suggest TV classes. I've suggested this how many times before, that our government make use of our South African SABC 1 and 2, where they at least half an hour a day give proper explanation of the present state of the nation, of crimes that's being committed, and giving out in all languages proper warnings as how can you protect yourself. But all the gentlemen here has said it all, but it will only stay here and only reach a few, and only those who have and are literate. If it does not reach everybody, this spate of all kinds of crimes in South Africa will rise.
All right, thank you so much for that. I think that's where we are going to have to leave it for tonight, although much more to be said. But unfortunately, time is against us, and that's where we are going to have to leave it. I think the public needs to be vigilant in the days coming, in the days ahead, the months ahead, the years ahead, in fact, because at the end of the day, we are all responsible for our safety. Mike Polhayes, specialized crime investigator at SA Safety and Security, Advocate Herman Bosman, kidnapping and extortion manager at TSU International, Martin Iwi, senior researcher at the Institute for Security Studies, Professor Gerard Labuschagne, criminologist at the Criminological Society of Southern Africa. Thank you all so much for your time this evening, and thanks to the listeners for tuning in as well. Remember that we will do this again next week, same time, same place. But for now, from myself, Zahid Jadwat, and the team, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Walaikum salam. Thank you, Zahid.
Thank you.
Thank you.